Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of the I Owe It to Myself podcast as we jump into the final episode for the A Court of Thorns and Roses read-along series. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about chapters 33 through 46, which is the end of the book. When we pick up with this last part of the book, Feyre has just gotten to Under the Mountain, and she's able to entice Amarantha enough to allow her to do a set of trials and try to prove that she loves Tamlin. The whole reason that this is happening and why she didn't just kill Feyre in the first place, in my opinion, is because she wants something interesting to happen. For one, I think she's bored to some extent, and it gives them a new layer, right? Nobody ever thought that her curse was going to come to fruition and that there was going to be a human that killed a fairy and would end up falling in love with Tamlin. That was always impossible. So the fact that you now have a human in front of them who is saying that they love Tamlin and that they love a fae in general is mind-boggling to her. She can't wrap her head around that because never in her days would she have ever thought that a human would love a fae. The killing part, of course, because humans and fae don't get along anyway. And humans have always been fearful of fae, but the love piece of it is something that she has never comprehended. And this is a big thing for her because her whole issue with Jurian was because he not only betrayed and killed her sister, but he had a human lover. So in her mind, he not only took the person that she loved most in this world by killing Amarantha's sister, but he then had the audacity to love a human and not even love any other fae, which in her mind is blasphemous. So it's double-sided. It's that there's no way that humans could ever love fae because they're so fearful of them, and there's no reason why a fae should love a human because they're so far beneath them. Fae should just be with their own type of people. That is where her head is at. So when Feyre is here, like begging and saying, look, like, I really do love him, and obviously it didn't all come to light before the curse, but like, I want to prove it to you. She's like, okay, why not? Because if anything, it's going to provide entertainment for me. And so thus begins this whole process that's going to take place over 3 months. And when I read that again, I had forgotten. I didn't remember that is how long that she made her stay there. I originally thought it was pretty fast, but to be underground for 3 months, to be living in the conditions that she's living in, to be treated the way that she's being treated, to be the only human down there, I can't even fathom something like that. And a lot happens in such a short amount of time for this last portion of this book, but I don't think that there really is a ton of emphasis on just how much time actually has gone by. It feels like it's going by so quick just because of the pace of the reading and everything that's going on. But 3 months is a rather long time, especially for the circumstances that she's in and the conditions she's living in. I think one of the first characters outside of Feyre that I want to talk about is Lucien, because him and his family, we kind of start to see the beginning of how Feyre treats people coming to her benefit and coming to her aid. What I mean by that is Lucien is one of the first to come and see her after she gets welcomed into the Under the Mountain court and gets her butt kicked by all of these evil creatures that work for Amarantha. And he heals her not fully, but at least enough to make sure that she's in one piece. Later down the road, when Feyre starts to go through some trials, at one point she ends up sparing Lucien by telling Amarantha her real name, because one of the callbacks that we end up seeing the result of is knowing that when Rhys came and asked for her name and she said Claire, that he did tell Amarantha that, and that's why Claire Better's entire family was killed. Now, when Feyre comes to the court and realizes that Claire was tortured and is literally like pinned to the wall, obviously she has a lot of grief and feelings about that, rightfully so. But thus Amarantha's like, who are you then? And she's threatening Lucien in this moment because she wants Feyre to tell her. And she's also giving Rhys grief because she's like, how did you not know that Claire wasn't the woman that you saw because she was standing in front of you? And he's like, well, they all look the same. So there's something there where you can kind of also start to see that Rhys is playing a little bit of this game. And I'll talk about that when I get to him. But I'm backtracking to talk about all of this because Feyre gives her name and spares Lucien in that moment. And so as she starts to go through some things and the way that she's being treated in these little like side quest that Amarantha's posse of people are putting her through. At one point, Lucian's mom comes and like clears her pail of water so it's clean water so she can actually clean the floor so she doesn't get in trouble because they set her up to fail with that task. My point in saying all of this is that, for one, Lucian and his mother seem to be fine. They never seem to be the crux of the issue. We know that it's Lucian and his father and his brothers that there is a lot of disdain for each other for. But still, for her to come and risk any type of safety that they may have by saying, like, I'll throw you a bone and help you because you saved my son, on one hand shows that she really is in Lucian's corner to a degree, at least at this moment from what we know. She is appreciative enough of what Feyre did because of how much she cares about her son. So we get a little bit of insight there, but obviously it then helps Feyre to actually have cleaned the floor and not to get in trouble from not having been able to do what they were asking her to do. And so that's the first time that you kind of see this whole thing where the way that she acts towards Faye now and in these moments is starting to win her favor in some places. And I point that out because she has had a lot of grief since she found out about Claire's family and then seeing Claire's body. I don't think I mentioned this, but that was one of the things that kind of spurred her to come back. Not only the fact that she knew Tamlin was in trouble, but when she was home with their sisters and finding out that everything that had happened to Claire's family, they just thought it was some kind of, fire or whatever. But Feyre knew. She knew that something was wrong. When she realizes what happened, she has a lot of grief about that. There's this juxtaposition where internally Feyre is very much having a hard time with her decisions and the fact that it's affecting other people. But it is because she has such a deep care for people that she feels it so deeply. And then with that, along, on that same thread, she cares for the people that she cares about, obviously very deeply. And even though her and Lucian aren't the best of friends, like they have a relationship and they have a rapport with one another. So she was willing to just say, screw it, I'm going to tell her my first name, I'm going to only tell her my first name, but I'm going to do it to spare Lucian because she cares about him. And so there is this interesting thing happening where her internal struggle is because I think of so much of her empathy and how she cares for people, and she just doesn't want her actions to result in harm to others. And it has continued to, some of it for reasons beyond her control. And then you have the other side of that where it plays a part in her staying alive. And I don't think that she realizes that, especially in this book. I think that there's a lot of blindness that Feyre has to her ability to see that. And so when she's like grieving and coping with the fact of the decisions she's made and the bad side of them, she can't see and almost give herself grace. But we as the reader are seeing certain things happen where it's like, that is only because of how good you are, or your willingness to stick your neck out for other people, that these things are now coming back to you in a positive way. So I just want to comment on that because I feel like that theme is not necessarily going to go away. And I think especially with her, that struggle is going to be something that's pretty central to her going forward. Now I want to pivot to one of the main things that is happening in this last set of chapters of this book, which is Feyre's relationship with Rhysand and her relationship with Tamlin. The entirety of what Feyre is doing is for the sake of saving Tamlin's life. And yes, that means that it would save his lands and it would help all the other High Lords. And this act is not just limited to the betterment of his life. It is bigger than that, but her focus and goal is because of the fact that she loves him. She obviously wants him to be okay and she wants to save his life. However, what you come to know is that Tamlin is being so stoic and so distant because he doesn't want Amarantha to at all use any of his reactions against him in regard to Feyre. He doesn't want her to see what types of torment that she inflicts on Feyre really gets to him the most, because he just knows that that's going to fuel the fire. At the end of the day, Amarantha loves being able to torture Feyre because not only because she's a human, but because of the fact that Tamlin cares for her, which is twisted because she likes Tamlin. All that she wants is for Tamlin to be with her. And so you would think that why would you want to hurt him by hurting Feyre? Because he's never going to want to be with you anyway. But at this point, he has already made it clear that he wants nothing to do with her. So in her mind, she's like, well, maybe if I hurt something enough that he loves, that he will just give into it. Or if I just kill her outright, he won't have her to love anyway. So then he would just be with me. Her approach is so twisted in that way, and her thinking is so off in that way, that she just doesn't really care, right? Even still, she just doesn't really care. And so Tamlin doesn't want to give her any fuel for the fire in ways of torturing Feyre. So he's very stoic and he's unattached. That's the way that it comes across. Feyre comes to know that. She assumes that for a while, or kind of understands for a while why he is the way that he is. But she also, I think, in part for that time, thought that she was controlling him and keeping him stoic so that Feyre would have no comfort. But she comes to eventually find out that really he's just doing it himself to not give Amarantha any ammo. And that's fine, because we know that it's out of preservation for Feyre, and we know why Tamlin, is doing that. On the other side of that, Rhysand is the main person who is coming into play in Feyre's life during this time, because Lucien can't come and see her all that often. He did in the very beginning to help her, and then when he got hurt and punished, he came back after he had recovered to be like, how the hell could you make a pact with Rhys? But her whole thing was like, I was dying and you weren't here. And he was like, well, I wasn't here because I was healing. But the reality is it's set up almost for you to think that Rhys is really being just cunning and manipulative, and is trying, despite the circumstances of this much larger issue that they're all in, he's trying to manipulate the situation into his favor. And so it's kind of given that vibe for a while until you get closer towards the end and you start to see more about who he is. And the thing with this is, even though, as I had mentioned, this is all across a matter of a couple of months, and Feyre really has only been in the Supreme Court, I think also for a couple of months, if she can fall in love with Tamlin in that amount of time, she can build a relationship with Rhys in that amount of time. She wasn't expecting to, and she doesn't want to, because she still has hesitations towards him. But this whole way that she approaches him continues. And what I mean by that is she knows he's dangerous. She knows he's powerful. She's very wary of him. But she completely speaks her mind around him. She doesn't hold her tongue. It's almost like she's very comfortable just being herself. She does not walk on eggshells. Like, she can be a little bit hesitant, and like she tries to be strategic in her mind because she knows how he can be, but she does not hold anything back when it comes to him. And initially it's because it's like one more thing to deal with. I don't want to deal with your shit. We're all under this mountain together. I am going through the worst time of my life trying to save this person I love, who I never thought that I would ever love or have a chance at being with. And you're here just trying to like say mean things about me or rile me up or whatever the case is. I don't want to deal with your shit. Like, that's kind of her attitude, and all of it is super understandable. But in that, things start to change. The overall point that I want to make in regard to Rhysand is that we come to find out that he only was doing it for the sake of saving Feyre's life. Feyre was the only chance that they all had, and Rhysand was not going to fuck that up. He was not going to at all let there be an opportunity for her to not have every chance to succeed, because he believed that she could do it. He says early on, after that first trial, I was the only one that bet on you. You could say, okay, he's just being manipulative and whatever, but I think really in his heart of hearts, he wanted her to win. He, more than anybody, wants this situation with Amarantha to be over. And again, nobody thought that this would ever happen. Nobody thought that the curse would actually be like a real thing where somebody would show up. And she did. And he looked at that situation and he's like, there's no way in hell that I'm going to let this fail. I'm going to do everything that I can on my part to help. One thing I want to specifically mention with that is when Lucien is hurt and he comes in and she's dying and he saves her, he does this whole bargain thing where she'll come and visit him and they go back and forth and whatever. He does the bargain and he marks her with the tattoo and the eye on the palm of her hand. What that ends up leading to is him helping her during the trial, at least specifically when it came to the reading situation. He was able to like thrust a feeling through this tattoo into her hand to help her realize what was the right or wrong lever. In trial 1, he didn't help her at all because there was no way for him to, but he bet on her. Trial 2 was the lovers where he helped her. And then in trial 3, there was nothing that he could do. So he wasn't able to like cheat the system, if you will, on majority of the trials, but at least on that one, he used that connection of this bargain and this tattoo to be able to help her. Now, did he make the bargain specifically to be able to tattoo her, specifically to be able to help her just in case? I don't know. He says, like, in my land or in my world, when we make bargains, this is what happens. The tattoo shows up. Okay, fine, fair, right? But even still, you in the moment, you're thinking that he is bribing her and saying, I will keep you alive and I will spare you and I'll heal you if you come over and you hang out with me, you know, every so often, so many times a month or whatever. But knowing who Reese is and seeing how these conversations go and where things net out, you could say that he really only did it so he could use that tattoo and that connection to help her through the trials just in case. And it ended up being a benefit to him because he had no idea that she couldn't read until she was in that trial and she didn't know what she was doing. I think that it's set up for you as a reader to think that he was just kind of being an ass and was like, you know, I help you, you help me. But I have that perspective of like, at the end of the day, he's really doing it because he wanted to make sure that she was given every opportunity to succeed. Because there was a chance that he wouldn't have had to help her at all in the second trial. He didn't know. So, but still, I do think that some part of him, because of how smart and cunning he is, that in the back of his mind, he was like, I could have this tattoo benefit both of us just in case something goes down in these trials. Now, speaking of that, when the second trial ends, she is so embarrassed. She is so mortified. Like, you see her insecurities come full blast because she's like, I am so embarrassed. I'm a worthless human. I can't read. Like, of course, reading would be the thing that kills the dumb human. Like, every insecurity that she has, and some of which were ones that she kind of started speaking about when she was in the Supreme Court in the very beginning, she's mentioning in her inner monologue during that time. Now, Rhysand is smart enough to know, but I don't actually know that anybody else realized that she couldn't read. Maybe Lucien and obviously Tamlin, but I don't know that Amarantha knew that. I don't know that she thought that that was why she almost failed, or she just didn't understand what was in front of her and didn't know the answer. I point that out because this is one of those things where she even was having a hard time talking to Tamlin about it. Like, she didn't really want his help. He gave her the library and whatever, but like, she's very tight-lipped about the whole reading situation. So for Rhysand to know that and to be in on that secret and on such a vulnerable thing for her, it puts him in a different category than other characters. And again, it's not like she intentionally sought him out and told him this secret of hers, and this embarrassing one at that. He figured it out because of the circumstances, but still, there are just some moments where it's like, in vulnerable situations, he's the one that's there. And that connection drives them to have some kind of symbiotic relationship, despite her reservations and hesitations about him and knowing about his evilness. The last kind of thing that I want to comment on, which goes along with this relationship that they have, is that he, at some point, just decides to start telling her a lot of the truth. Obviously, it's a very small fraction of who he is as a person and as a character, but he just comes and is like, I'm so done with this. Like, I just need a minute to sit in silence and be done with it. Because what is implied is that he reinforces the fact that he is Amarantha's whore, and she, you know, uses him for physical desires and whatever. And he's like, I'm over all of it, right? And I think what you're experiencing in this moment with him is that she created hope for him. Her showing up and being real, and not only being real, but being freaking good to some extent, gave him a hope that he has not had for the many decades he's been under the mountain. And so even though he has a lot of power, and even though it seems that he can run a little bit looser than some of the other people that she controls in regard to Amarantha, she lets him get away with a little bit more, it seems. He is just being tormented. He doesn't want to be in this situation. He doesn't want to have anything to do with any of this, but he's there because of the family situation that happened with Tamlin and their parents and all of that stuff prior to Amarantha having this reign that she's having. And that vulnerability and him being candid is, I think that ends up being the first time that Feyre actually sees him. she starts to talk about having empathy for him, right? And being sympathetic. And as much as he drives her nuts, she does realize that he was doing all of what he was doing to save her and to give her a chance. And in that, what I find interesting, and this is the point I want to pivot to next, is that in that dialogue, when I was reading it on that page, she's processing all of what she's hearing from Rhysand and how she feels about him. But then she's also saying, like, Tamlin didn't do anything. And it's small remarks like that we start to see from Feyre. There's small moments where she's like, Tamlin hasn't said anything. Tamlin's been stoic. You know, Rhys has been the one that's been there to help and whatever. And you can only imagine, again, being under a mountain with no light, being treated like shit for 3 months, getting killed practically every time that she goes into a trial. And you're going to be feeling so many things that I can't even imagine or describe. And to have one person, I mean, yes, she has Lucien, but to have somebody she didn't expect to be so sympathetic and to only pull the strings that he could pull to keep her alive was finally dawning on her. And so, of course, she, being the kind-hearted person that she is going to be empathetic towards that, and then therefore empathetic towards who he is as a person, because she's realizing there is way more to you. His mask has come off in the sense of he's just this like cunning, dark Amaranthus whore. But he really isn't. And this is the first time where you start to see a moment where that isn't the case. Now, we don't know enough about him at this point to know if that's true, if you're a first-time reader, but you start to get the idea that there's no way that somebody who's that kind of slithery and sly and cunning could then be that honest and empathetic and not be more layers there. It's not something you ignore. It's not something that just happens by chance. There is reasoning behind that. And so this is where you start to have that door open and to kind of understand that. The second point that I'll make about that quickly before I pivot to what I want to with Feyre is that when Amarantha is killing Feyre at the end of this book and Rhysand tries to jump in and kill Amarantha, he can't really do much. And he actually ends up getting his ass kicked himself by her power. And dare I say she was like on the road of potentially killing him because she's like, I knew your true colors would show. Like the reality is that he was more or less willing to die that day because he probably would have. If Feyre had died and the curse wasn't lifted and everybody was still under her rule, she probably would have just killed Rhysand because she would have had Tamlin at that point. And even if he wouldn't have like been her lover or done anything for her, I'm sure she would have hoped or tried to manipulate him into getting into that place in her life, and she would have had no need for Rhys anymore. I mean, it's very highly likely that he was just like, fuck it, I don't even care anymore if I die, because there's no way that she's going to have done everything that she did, she being Feyre, and put so much on the line for us, even though it's, you know, fully for Tamlin, but to sacrifice as much as she has for Faye, and for me not to try to save her. It's just not an option. That, again, is another piece into this fact of like, if he was just cunning and sly and sneaky and, you know, dark and even at all in Amarantha's corner, that would have never happened. So you get to the end of this book and they are really positioning Rhysand as this somebody that you want to know because he's this beautiful, powerful man. He's now been unleashed like the rest of them where he has his full power. And Feyre is having the realization that he truly, for the most part, saved her life during this entire situation under the mountain, but he also saved her before that at Calanmai. There is just more there, and she is both aggravated by that and intrigued by it. And you can see it in the way that her inner monologue process goes and how she comments on certain things. And so especially at the end of the book, when she's out on the balcony with him, she starts to mention, like, I can feel this pulling and I know who it is. I know without even having to think about it, and I follow the pulling into the direction, and it's Rhys. It's like, okay, that's the tattoo again, right? He's kind of calling to her, and they have this conversation, and it's a pretty, like, walls down conversation, right? I mean, she's a little guarded, but she's so shattered. She's so just absolutely shattered from this whole situation that she even comments, like, when I look out at these mountains and these colors, I'm not feeling anything right now. I don't feel or seeing the way that I was before, not just because of the fact that now she's high fae. If anything, it's all amplified, but her soul doesn't feel anything because she's so crushed, but yet she's an artist. So the one thing she should be is excited by seeing the light and outside and all of this kind of stuff. And so you know that she's really going through it. And that in part is why I think she can just have this kind of honest conversation with Rhys because it's just like she's so shed bare that what else is there but that, right? So even in that small conversation, though, my point is that there's a little bit more friendliness there. Not a lot, because she's giving him attitude, but there's a little bit more openness. And it's just, again, I think this processing of everything that he's done for her. Now, the very last thing that happens between them is as he's getting ready to leave, she kind of notes that she like looks at him fully. So, okay, let me make my point and then I'll explain what I think. She kind of notes that she looks at him fully as he's like fading away in his shadows. And he looks at her and kind of like staggers, and then he disappears. And you don't at the time know what that's about. I obviously do, because I've read this before, but in the moment it's like, okay, this weird thing happened. Like, he doesn't stagger. He is not one to be tripped up. So she was very taken by that. But I think, because it wasn't super clear to me when I was reading it, but I think essentially when she goes up there to the balcony, she can see him, but I think he was already looking out. So when she goes to stand next to him, they're looking out at the scene. They're not looking at each other. So even when he looks at her, or if she looks at him, it was never like directly to each other. They're just kind of, if you think of a natural conversation, you're talking, you're looking at the view, whatever. So I think when this moment happened, it was the first time he looked at her square on since she has become Fae. And he was impacted by that, which we will definitely talk about in the second book and read-along series. Now, I want to pivot back to Feyre when I was talking about how her commentary about what Tamlin does and doesn't do and what Rhysand does and doesn't do. It was either as she was dying or after she came back to life and was realizing that she was Fae and kind of processing everything that happened. In that series of pages and chapters, there was a moment where her dialogue was going rather quickly and she was just reliving everything as much as possible. I think it was when she was getting tortured and when she was dying. And she is saying certain things like, Rhysand, Tamlin lied and Tamlin wasn't truthful, but I know why he wasn't. And like, there's just this moment of dialogue where she is like processing in rapid succession. And it's a summary almost of everything that she has felt. And there is quite a bit, if I had to say, in terms of like percentage wise, where it's like Tamlin didn't and Tamlin wouldn't and Tamlin couldn't. And she's realizing all of what he held back and how he didn't help and how he stunted her and potentially prevented her from things. At the same time, she's processing and comments on like, well, they let me overhear things and they had certain conversations, with doors open and whatever. And I know that they're smarter than that. And I know they can hear me coming and this, that, and the other thing. They did that so I could overhear stuff because they can't tell me directly, but they wanted me to overhear. So she's having this moment where it's like, okay, all of these cons, but then some of these good things or things that she realized that they were doing intentionally to try to help her or have her understand the situation or whatever the case may be. But in my opinion, the takeaway is that there's more negative than positive. And this goes back to what I've said prior about how we know where Feyre's relationship with Tamlin ends up, and that a lot of where her frustration ends up coming for him is from how he ends up treating her and the communication that they have with each other. What this does is plant that seed of how those things are going to start to come to life. I had mentioned at one point that she had been so blinded because she was caring about him and falling for him and, was just free from the burden that she had of taking care of her family, that she was in bliss for a little bit there and she wasn't seeing everything. Clearly, she was wearing rose-colored glasses with the situation that she was in, but there would be moments where stuff would happen and you would kind of see her be a little bit sad about it or down about it or whatever, but she always prevailed and kind of kept going and was positive and just tried to see the positivity in it, because after all, she hasn't known Tamlin for very long, so she's trying to get her footing too, right? But when she's able to then step back, and in this moment of processing and kind of brain dumping everything, she's realizing that there was a lot of bad there. There was a lot of frustrating things and limiting things and untrusting things, and he hasn't done shit to help her when she's been under this mountain. And albeit if it's for her safety, at the end of the day, she only survives because of Rhys. And it's not that Rhys did it so he could sit there and tell Tamlin that. He certainly could use that to his advantage to poke and to prod him, but it still doesn't negate the fact that he did save her and Tamlin didn't. So there's just moments where you're really kind of setting up to even more have this be Rhysand versus Tamlin situation, but the scales are turning, and Rhysand is the one that is at the higher point now in terms of being higher on Feyre's pro list than Tamlin is. And so I think, again, when we kind of talk about where she's at and her relationship with Rhysand and how that's all forming, it's not just the way that he is towards her and how he acts and what he says and, you know, his demeanor, but it's also her own processing. All of that to say, it's because her eyes are wide open. It's not only that her eyes are wide open because she knows everything, it's because now that she's Fae too, like just everything, her entire life has changed and everything that she knows has changed. And she doesn't want to be in the dark anymore. And I think because of that, she's reflecting on everything that happened and got them to where they are. And there's going to be feelings about that, rightfully so. So I just found that it was interesting that we are starting to see that shift and her realization is coming to light as well. Now, I think the last main thing that I want to talk about in all of this is I made a comment about how Rhysand said that he bet on Feyre in the first trial. And what I will say is we knew that Feyre was good at hunting and using a bow and whatever. And no, she didn't do all of these trials perfectly, and not all of them were necessarily based on skill. But to know that the first trial was with the worm and the way in which it goes down, it's just so epic. Even reading it again, I can picture it all perfectly as she's going through that maze and she's in that shit literally, and just how crazy it is and setting up the trap and all of this stuff. She is smart and she is, she can adapt, and it was such an impactful first trial for her to have, an impression for her to make. And I think that especially coming off of that, there was major intrigue there from Rhys because he was like, damn, like I didn't just bet on you because I had hope. I now know that I was doing the right thing. Like you proved me right in every conceivable way and exceeded every expectation that I had. And that impression, I think, piqued his intrigue enough to kind of stick his nose in things and thus go down the road of helping her and saving her life ultimately. But as of now, we have never seen Tamlin say that he's proud of her. Like at the end of the book, he says, thank you. You know, they're kind of recovering and having intimate moments and trying to get themselves together before they go back to the house. And he says thank you for all of it, right? And you see Feyre kind of struggling with her own feelings and this idea of having saved all these people. But he never had said that he was proud of her. And so, not that Rhys did either, but I just think that for her to have gone through as many things as she could have, all that she needed was comfort, and she wasn't going to really get it. And even in the moments of everything happening, Rhys wasn't really providing her comfort, but him even showing up and throwing her a bone and giving her something to grasp onto in terms of someone to talk to or someone being there to potentially help her if she needed it, that was a lifeline that she desperately needed in many ways, more ways than one, not just literally to keep her alive, but mentally and emotionally. And I don't think in the moment she always realized it. Sometimes she would. Like there, I think, was one moment where she was like, I'm actually glad that he was there, that Rhys was there or came to see me or whatever. But truly, I think the impact is a little understated at this point and will certainly come to life more in book 2 of just how much of a lifeline that he was. And so I say all this and I go on this tangent just because it was really great to see Feyre kick ass and take names in that first trial. I think it really shows us that she is far more than we think her to be too. And there's certainly many more things to get to know across all of these books. And I remember it from the first time that it really set her up for me as being somebody to not underestimate. If anything, that is the theme, because Tamlin sent her away because he didn't want her to get killed or to get captured, but he underestimated her because she's a human, right? Whereas Rhys bet on her right away for whatever reason, right? And so that alone is pretty much everything that you need to know in regard to kind of the direction that things go in with both of these men. As always, it's interesting to see how things go forward and how these, again, types of like pro-con situations with Rhys and Tamlin will continue to evolve. So by the time that we get to the end of this book, they are out from under that mountain and it's sealed off so nobody can get back in, and they make their way back to Tamlin's and they see Alice and the boys, and you're left with this feeling of like, we have life ahead of us, which is really great. And the only thing that is a rub is the fact that she has the tattoo on her arm, and Tamlin's first comment is like, we'll find a way out of it. And she's like, I just don't want to talk about it. So you have that kind of hiccup, but then they're in this life where people are free and it's seemingly picturesque, at least for this moment. So I guess I'll end just by saying that you clearly know more is going to come of the situation with Reese. You know that is where book 2 is headed, just based on the things that I've mentioned. But for all intents and purposes, it feels pretty cheery and pretty positive and pretty happy in kind of the wider sense of their lives and where you're left. But you also have to remember that Feyre is a broken soul now. Everything that she has tried to be and the goodness that she's tried to carry has been shattered because she's killed innocent people. And that is something that is going to haunt her for the rest of her life. And she mentions that. She talks about being different. She talks about how she is forever changed. And again, going back to how, she was viewing the land when she was standing with Reese at the balcony and she didn't really feel anything in the way that she normally had. She is damaged beyond repair. And so you're positive about the outcome, but the way that they got there and then what that means for Feyre is not great. And the person that we're now going to get on the other side, it's like before Faye and after Faye, or even before the mountain and after the mountain. It's a different woman. And so I say that just to keep it in mind as we move into the second book of the version of her that we're going to see and how she's going to continue to evolve as a character. But I think that is it for now. I believe I've touched on everything that I have to say, and I'm just going to keep on going. I'm going to dive right into book 2. We're going to get that read-along series going and posted here shortly. And, so far I can say I've enjoyed this read-along and this reread, and I'm excited to continue with the rest of the book. So I appreciate you all for listening to this episode and doing the read-along with me. I look forward to hearing what your thoughts are. If you are rereading as well, please let me know in the comments of the YouTube video how you feel, where your head's at. Are you seeing Easter eggs differently? Are you finding new things? Share all of your thoughts and feelings over there. So friendly reminder, please make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel. If you're liking these videos, please give them a thumbs up on the actual video on YouTube. You can also follow us and listen on Spotify. And then as always, please stay connected with us on socials. We're on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok. That's where I post schedules as well as notifications when episodes are released. And I look forward to doing many more of these for the entire ACOTAR series. So thanks so much, friends, and until next time.